Anti-Zionism is the trap. Anti-Zionism did not begin with TikTok. It did not begin with campus encampments. It did not begin when some sophomore discovered decolonization between oat milk lattes and a sociology midterm. Anti-Zionism is old, older than the hashtags, older than the keffiyeh cosplay, older than the influencers who think history started when they downloaded Canva. And that is the trap. The trap is convincing Jews that this is a new debate, a fresh controversy, a modern misunderstanding, a public relations problem, a branding issue. It is not. It is an old obsession wearing new sneakers. The words change, the posters change, the slogans get updated by people with graphic design accounts and very strong opinions about countries they could not find on a map without emotional support. But the demand stays the same. The Jewish state must justify its existence, not its policies, not its leaders, not this government or that government, its existence. That is the tell. No one makes Americans relitigate 1776 every morning on cable news. No one tells France to justify 1789 before breakfast. No one demands that Italy explain every footnote of unification before it is allowed to remain on a map. Nobody says, I support Americans, just not Americanism, because that would sound ridiculous. But say, I support Jews, just not Zionism, and suddenly every midwit with a ring light thinks he discovered moral philosophy. What Zionism actually means. So let us make this painfully simple. Zionism means the Jewish people have the right to live as a free people in our ancestral homeland. That is it. Not perfection, not immunity from criticism, not agreement with every Israeli policy, not a blank check for every Israeli politician who makes us yell before coffee. Zionism is Jewish self-determination, the same right every other people claims for itself. Encyclopedia Britannica describes Zionism as a Jewish nationalist movement aimed at creating and supporting a Jewish national state in Palestine, the ancient homeland of the Jews, and notes that modern Zionism continued the ancient Jewish attachment to the land of Israel. That last part matters. Zionism did not invent the Jewish connection to Israel. It politicized an ancient longing because history made longing insufficient. Our grandparents did not pray next year in Brooklyn. They did not break a glass at weddings to remember a zoning dispute. They did not face Jerusalem in prayer because it had good hummus and decent weather. Jerusalem is not a metaphor to Jews. It is memory with stones. And Zionism was not some random modern fantasy scribbled on a napkin in a smoky European cafe. It entered international diplomacy through the Balfour Declaration of 1917, in which the British government supported the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, while also stating that the civil and religious rights of non-Jewish communities should not be prejudiced. Then came the League of Nations mandate for Palestine, confirmed in 1922, which recognized the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and created administrative obligations connected to the establishment of the Jewish national home. Then came the United Nations Partition Plan of 1947, Resolution 181, which proposed partitioning the land into two states, one Arab and one Jewish, with Jerusalem under a special international regime. The Jews said yes. The Arab leadership said no. That no has been echoing ever since. The difference between criticism and elimination. This is not to say Israel is above criticism. Of course, Israel can be criticized. Israel is a real country. Real countries have real governments, real flaws, real failures, real arguments, and real politicians who can make you question whether democracy is a divine gift or a group project assigned by Satan. Jews criticize Israel constantly. In Israel, criticizing the government is practically a national sport. There should be uniforms, possibly snacks. Valid criticism says, do better. Anti-Zionism says disappear. That is the line, and once you see the line, you cannot unsee it. A person can oppose a particular Israeli military operation. A person can criticize settlement policy. A person can object to a prime minister, a coalition, a court reform plan, or a border policy. That is politics. But when someone says the one Jewish state on earth has no right to exist, that is not policy criticism. That is elimination. There is a difference between saying this state should act differently and saying this state should not exist. One is debate, the other is a threat dressed up as ethics. The historical pattern. Anti-Zionism was not merely an abstract academic argument in the 20th century. It helped shape a regional refusal to accept Jewish sovereignty at all. After the 1967 Six-Day War, the Arab League met in Khartoum and issued the famous three no's: no peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, no negotiations with Israel. Very subtle, almost diplomatic, practically a group hug. That was not criticism of a settlement policy. That was not concern over judicial reform. That was not a disagreement with the prime minister. That was rejection, and rejection has a history. It was behind the wars launched against Israel. It was behind campaigns of terror. It was behind the idea that Jewish sovereignty itself was the crime. The Munich massacre in 1972 was carried out by Palestinian terrorists who took Israeli Olympic athletes hostage and murdered them. The first and second intifadas were not Twitter arguments with flags attached. They were violent uprisings marked by attacks, bombings, fear, and blood. And long before the modern campus chant became fashionable, Jews across the Middle East knew what it meant when politics turned Jewish life into a target. In 1941, the Farhud erupted in Baghdad, a pogrom against Iraq's ancient Jewish community. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum describes it as a turning point in the history of Iraqi Jewry. That community was not European. It was not colonial. It was not some imported settler population. Jews had lived in Iraq for more than 2,000 years. Let that sit for a moment. A Jewish community older than Islam, older than most modern nations, older than the languages of many people now lecturing Jews about indigeneity, was devastated by anti Semitic violence in the Arab world. And Iraq was not alone. After 1948, Jewish communities across the Middle East and North Africa were uprooted through expulsion, persecution, confiscation, intimidation, and flight. The Jewish Virtual Library estimates that roughly 820,000 to 850,000 Jewish refugees fled Arab countries between 1948 and 1972. These Jews did not leave behind empty apartments and forwarding addresses. They left homes, businesses, synagogues, graves, languages, recipes, songs, entire worlds. Funny how the people who shout endlessly about refugees suddenly misplace their empathy when the refugees are Jews. A Shanum Dank, as my ancestors might say. Thanks for nothing. The Soviet upgrade. Anti-Zionism as propaganda. Long pause. Modern anti-Zionism also received a major ideological upgrade from the Soviet propaganda machine. After Israel aligned more closely with the West, Soviet anti-Israel messaging increasingly framed Zionism as racism, colonialism, fascism, and imperialism. By the 1970s and 1980s, Soviet-backed anti-Zionist campaigns helped export a vocabulary that many activists still use today, often without knowing who handed them the script. Evo's encyclopedia documents the Soviet Anti-Zionist Committee, created in 1983, as part of this official anti-Zionist public campaign. This culminated internationally in 1975 with United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3379, which declared that Zionism was a form of racism and racial discrimination. The resolution was later revoked in 1991 by Resolution 46/86. That matters because Zionism is racism did not fall from the sky. It was manufactured, repeated, institutionalized, and laundered through international bodies until people forgot it was propaganda and started calling it theory. That is how ideological laundering works. Step 1, invent the smear. Step 2, repeat the smear. Step 3, cite the repetition as evidence. Step 4, accuse Jews of paranoia for noticing. Mazel tov. You have invented academic anti Semitism. The double standard. Here is the cleanest test. Does the rule apply to everyone or only to Jews? If someone opposes all nation states, fine. That is at least consistent. Wrong, maybe, but consistent. If someone believes every people should give up sovereignty, borders, flags, armies, and national self determination, then we can have that conversation after they finish abolishing France. But if they only oppose Jewish sovereignty, we are not talking about universalism. We are talking about a double standard. No one demands that Pakistan justify its existence because partition was violent. No one says Jordan is illegitimate because it emerged from British imperial arrangements. No one says Arab nationalism is inherently racist because it privileges Arab identity. No one says Palestinian nationalism must be abolished because Palestinian leaders have committed terrorism. Only Jewish nationalism is treated as uniquely sinful. Only Jewish self-determination is described as a cosmic moral emergency. Only the Jewish state is told that its very existence is violence. That is not human rights. That is anti-Semitism with a graduate degree. The settler colonial lie. This is part of the trap too. Anti-Zionism tries to cast Jews as foreign intruders in our own history. It turns indigenous Jews into colonizers. It erases Mizrahi Jews. It erases Sephardi Jews. It erases Ethiopian Jews. It erases the Jews expelled from Arab lands. It erases the Jews who never left the land. It erases the Hebrew language, Jewish prayer, Jewish law, Jewish archaeology, Jewish memory, and then has the chutzpah to call itself historical justice. That is not justice. That is identity theft with footnotes. Colonialism usually means a foreign empire sends settlers to exploit land for the benefit of a mother country. So here is the obvious question. What was the Jewish mother country? Poland, Iraq, Yemen, Morocco, Russia. The same places where Jews were persecuted, expelled, restricted, murdered, or treated as permanent outsiders. Zionism was not Jews leaving safety to build an empire. It was Jews returning from exile because exile kept trying to kill us. The modern impact. And today, anti-Zionism remains the ideology behind movements that do not want a better Israel, but no Israel. Hamas's 1988 covenant is not shy. It declares that Israel will exist until Islam obliterates it, frames the struggle against Jews in explicitly religious terms, and rejects peaceful solutions in favor of jihad. That is not ceasefire activism. That is eliminationism. So when someone tells you anti-Zionism has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, ask them why anti-Zionist movements keep ending up beside people who want Jews dead. At a certain point, coincidence needs a lawyer. And this is not abstract. After October 7th, 2023, anti-Semitism surged in the United States. ADL reported a record 9,354 anti-Semitic incidents in 2024, the highest annual total since ADL began tracking in 1979. In 2025, the number decreased 33% to 6,274 incidents. This remains the third highest year on record and dramatically higher than pre-October 7 levels. Physical assaults reached record highs, including some resulting in fatalities. So, no, this is not just rhetoric. The slogans have consequences, the chants have consequences, the just anti Zionism excuse has consequences. When Jewish students are harassed for supporting Israel, when synagogues need armed guards, when Jewish businesses are vandalized, when Israeli restaurants are targeted, when people scream Zionists at random Jews like it is a substitute for a swastika, the mask is not slipping. The mask is doing its job. The counter arguments. Now, the predictable objections. Not all anti Zionism is anti Semitism. Technically, yes. A person could hold a consistent anti nationalist view and oppose all nation states equally. A person could oppose Jewish nationalism because they oppose every nationalism. That position exists. It is just not what most street level anti Zionism looks like. Most of what we see is not principled universalism. It is selective outrage aimed at the Jewish state while ignoring, excusing, or romanticizing far worse regimes and movements. Another objection. Palestinians also deserve self determination. Yes, they do. Jewish self determination and Palestinian self determination are not morally incompatible. That was the entire logic of partition: two peoples, two states. The tragedy is not that Jews accepted self determination. The tragedy is that Arab leaders repeatedly rejected Jewish self determination as illegitimate. Another objection. Israel does bad things. Sometimes, yes. Israel is a country, not an angel. But bad policy does not erase a nation's right to exist. If it did, the United Nations would have fewer members than a minion. Criticism says, change the policy. Anti Zionism says, end the state. Again, that is the line. Again, that is the respond. Here is the emotional truth. We only obsess over defining Semite when anti Semitism is rising. We only obsess over defining Zionism when anti Zionism is rising. The debate itself is often the ambush. The bully punches you in the face, then demands you explain the history of your nose. And because Jews are traumatized, educated, and overqualified for anxiety, we often comply. We look inward. We argue with each other. We split hairs. We write essays. We hold panels. We debate whether we are allowed to say what everyone can plainly see. Meanwhile, the bully keeps swinging. Anti Zionism drags Jews into a circular conversation about our own legitimacy, while the people attacking us never have to justify their hatred. That is the trap. And Jews need to stop stepping into it. When they say, define Zionism, say Jewish self determination in the Jewish ancestral homeland. When they say, I only oppose Zionism, ask, do you oppose every people's self determination or just the Jews? When they say Israel has no right to exist, answer, and this is not criticism, this is elimination. Do not let them move the goalposts into a swamp. Do not let them turn Jewish survival into a graduate seminar. Do not let them make you prove that Jews are allowed to be a people. We are. We were a people before their ideology existed. We were a people before their institutions existed. We were a people before their hashtags, committees, manifestos, and morally constipated campus statements. And we will be a people after their slogans collapse under the weight of their own dishonesty. Name the trap. The scandal is not Zionism. The scandal is that after centuries of exile, demitude, pogroms, expulsions, gas chambers, rockets, kidnappings, and campus mobs, the world still acts shocked that Jews insist on defending ourselves. Anti Zionism is the oldest hatred wearing a new vocabulary. Check the label. Name the trap. Step over it. M. Israel Kai. If you enjoy my writing, support me by buying my book, Screaming into the Void, available on paperback or Kindle on Amazon.com.